So if I look at this, the whole is the screen moving, Zaid? Zaid? Hello?
Yep. Carry on.
Okay. So the idea of vIPtela came from working with a large healthcare provider. This is a tier 1 healthcare provider who's the idea these guys were coming up with. This is around 2000 timeframe. Sorry, 2010 timeframe. This is when the famous Obamacare, which you hear now is this ACA or healthcare with the payers, the insurers, were trying to see where the continuum of care breaks. So this ACA, in that they were saying that if a patient goes back to the hospital with the same illness within 30 days, the hospital will not be reimbursed. So obviously it was very, very crucial for the payers, which are the insurance guys, to see how to establish a continuum of care. So if you know anything about United States healthcare, healthcare is one of the biggest services industry in this country, which is about 17 or 18% of the GDP. And so there's a lot of effort around 2008, 2009 timeframe, which is called Affordable Care Act, or famously known as Obamacare, was to tie this whole system together. So there are about 380,000 ambulatory care providers in this country, and most people get service from these ambulatory care providers. So the only link between all these guys were the payers, like insurance companies. So they said, if we can tie these hospitals to the ambulatory care providers, we will be able to provide a continuum of care and remove a lot of inefficiencies, because there is a lot of duplication of data when you go to your primary care and then you go to the hospital. The same tests are repeated over and over again. An insurance company by law has to pay for it. So they started to look at building on this massive scale VPN, which they could bring in all these ambulatory care providers, health testing facilities, hospitals into a federated model to connect all these entities. They started to look in the available technologies to create this massive scale VPN. The only technology at the time that was available, for those of you who have worked with the internet and service providers, realize there is a technology called multi-protocol label switching, which service providers use to provide VPN services to large enterprise to connect site to site. Now, when they ran numbers, it was just completely cost prohibitive for them to use this technology at the VPN scale they were trying to build of a third-party VPNs or a partner VPNs. And as I was working inside of with these healthcare providers, it started to become clear to me, and I started to evangelize this idea inside of Cisco around 2009, 2000 timeframe, that we, Cisco, need to look at something different to scale this VPNs. Because if you look at the internet-based VPNs, they were technologically designed for create a very backhaul defined static systems. The MPLS VPNs changed and created a ubiquitous site-to-site connectivity. So if you wanted to go to the internet-based VPN and you wanted to create this dynamic network, you needed a site-to-site connectivity model. So this is the presentation I started to do inside of Cisco and didn't get anywhere. This is 2009, 2010 timeframe. For me, I was presenting it to a couple of senior leaders, and there were, at least I would say, no more than 3 guys who think that this idea has merit. There were 2 guys in Cisco. One of them was a Cisco fellow who said to me that this idea has a merit. And I'd known Amir for a long time, but Amir and I had been in different paths. So this is gentleman who was a Cisco fellow, Dino Farinacci, said, you two should talk. And of very few people, Amir was one of the early guys who said, yeah, I think this idea has a lot of merit. And we started to spend time on realizing how we can make this as a reality. This is around 2011 now. So the biggest innovator for me, which I always say in public forums, is the health insurance in this country. it is very, very expensive to get health insurance, and so many times people get bankrupt because of health insurance. So I thought about this for a period of time, and then finally had the courage to take the jump and go buy a private health insurance. Then the other one is, you work in corporate, you have that tremendous job security. You enjoy the perks, you have very well-defined structure, and you go by the structure. You don't have pressure for every small element. So you do have that job security, and a lot of times people who work in large corporates have that comfort level, or even if they have ideas, the job security and health insurance are the two biggest inhibitors, at least in the United States, and that's for me. Then obviously, when you're moving out of a fully paid permanent job, you have to run your home expenses. So at that time, we went out and looked for consulting contracts. And I think the biggest benefit we had as a team, that we knew a lot of enterprise and service provider customers. So we landed a consulting contract with a very, very large financial institutions. Then the next unknown was funding. I had no background on how funding is done and how you raise the money. And then there are always fear of unknowns. So from my perspective, those were my biggest inhibitors, that how really I want to move on and start this new business. Now, so the question now comes in, why the VC would select us. Now, if you look at most of the VCs over in the Valley, when they're talking to you as a Cisco employee, they'll always say, oh, you're going to need to come out and see if you have interesting ideas. You should try and come talking to us. The day you get out, the day that comfort of Cisco and the backing of Cisco goes away, 9 out of 10 people who were talking to you will say, no, don't think that you have the right experience because you don't have the Cisco backing. I think one of the benefits we had as a team, I always knew this idea was very strong, but Amir in his career had done startups. So the two of us, we got the VC traction. But it's very interesting. We were getting VC meetings. We went and talked to about 30 to 35 VCs. Now, remember this. We were on the verge of creating a brand new category. This is around 2011, 2012 timeframe, where the buzzword of cloud was becoming that what cloud services you can get, and software-defined networking was in its very infancy. But everybody in software-defined networking was focusing on the data center. And we came out and we went to VCs and said, the bigger problem is not inside of the data center. The much bigger problem is in the wide area. Because if you want cloud to be pervasive, you need to create a ubiquitous access. And there is not a single carrier that would be able to provide this ubiquitous access. And the only medium that provides ubiquitous access is the internet. And the way the cost structure is set up between the provider managed MPLS network and the internet commodity bandwidth, networks will have to use both circuits, one for lower cost and dynamic arbitrary connectivity, which is the internet-based circuit, the other MPLS for voice, video, guaranteed services. So imagine this message. We took it to about 30, 35 VCs. Consistent rejection, that this idea has no merit, that we don't see this as a problem. But we knew that this is a problem, because when we were consulting to a tier 1 financial, they were consistently saying that this is not scaling, this is becoming cost prohibitive. If I want to build a branch of the future, if I want to create this on-demand, high bandwidth, site-to-site connectivity, I need to figure out how cost effectively I need to do this. Now, this is about 36th or 37th VC till we landed at Sequoia Capital. The minute you walk into Sequoia Capital and your first meeting, you realize why they are the number 1 VC in this country, why they are the people who funded from Oracle to Apple to Cisco, Google, all the big names. They gave us a meeting for 30 minutes. That meeting turned into 2.5-hour discussion, and they grilled us every aspect of the solution, thought process, discussion. We came out of that meeting, we were quite confident that this is the first VC who actually got it. And within a week, this is the pace that these guys work with the Sequoia Capital. I was very, very impressed with the skill set, industry understanding. They have customer contacts. So by the time we had our second meeting, they were ready to fund us. So we got that funding from Sequoia Capital, but the biggest challenge we were facing was, we had personal brands, but not to the level that people will say, okay, we'll trust our money, a big amount of money. At the end of when vIPtela got an exit, we had raised by the third round $110 million. So you go from, if you're building an infrastructure company, you're going against the giants like Cisco. We created a brand new category in routing where Cisco has been doing routing for the past 30 years. We went out to the industry and said, guys, the routers are under attack, which is getting commoditized. Routing is going to grow. So people say, companies like Cisco is selling routers. They tell us that we're selling routing. So we converted a pure hardware business into a software subscription model. And that was very new for the industry until you went to people like Sequoia. So we needed brand, and we were both not as branded people. We had industry credibility, but not known in the VC community. So that was one of the things we thought was very beneficial for us, that Sequoia Capital, based on their reference checks and looking at the team, we were able to build a decent team, looked at us and said, they can take a chance at us. So that was our first opportunity to go and get the VC funding. So if I look at my high and low moments, let's start with the low moments. So the low moments for us was everybody was rejecting us consistently. And as we start to go take on the big boys by creating a product, once we started to go create a product, we thought our product had a lot of merit. Again, customers are very nervous handing over their network to a brand new company. So I'm giving over my infrastructure. This is very critical for my business, to a startup in infrastructure. So this is after a long time, a company comes in infrastructure, routing infrastructure. I think the last big player that came into routing infrastructure in 1996 was Juniper Networks. So here we are, bunch of guys with a different set of experience going out and telling the industry that this is pivoting in this direction. It's going to be software defined. It's going to be converting into a subscription model rather than a hardware-based business. And it took us a while for industry to actually accept. There were a lot of customers who understood the value of the idea, but most people were not willing to take the risk. The high moment came to us is when one of the major healthcare providers in the United States said to us, boys, I'll take a risk with you. I think your idea has a lot of merit. It has a lot of cost savings. It has a lot of operational efficiencies, which I am looking for. If I'm to expand this network into the larger footprints the way I'm thinking about, it's worth taking the risk. And then on top of it, right after that, there's a major retailer that followed, and which is a public knowledge that the first biggest customer vIPtela got was the Gap stores. And then after that, we had a major financial. So in the moment of very short span, we got 3 major customers who are saying, okay, we think this idea has a merit. The minute any of these big boys, especially one in big name in retail, one big name in healthcare, and one big name in financials, endorsed the idea and said that this company has the capability from technological perspective, then next thing comes in, would you be able to build a sustainable business? For that, you need strong financial backing. That is where Sequoia Capital backing comes in. So if you look at Sequoia Capital, and I still remember that discussion, our board member, Mike Gogan, said to one of our financial customers, Sequoia Capital since 1972 has given about $4 trillion to U.S. economies, the companies that we have funded. So Sequoia Capital is not short of money. Now, from that perspective, we had the credibility of financials. We were on a real high by talking to some of these major customers. and we started to get momentum, and we started to get noticed. This is the first biggest loss of Cisco in their 20 years enterprise history at the scale that they got disrupted was vIPtela in the routing space, in enterprise routing space. They had never lost at this magnitude to any competitor. So obviously, when you start taking on the big boys, there are challenges that comes in, but you get noticed. So let me say, so lesson learned. I think the thing that was very powerful in the team, we had very good group of guys. Like I think Amir brought some very solid product management and good engineering guys, and I brought in very senior network architects. I think one of the things most products lacked, which vIPtela had, we combined the people of strong engineering, development, product management background with people who have deployed very large networks. So for us, what was very critical is the technology is not sold just to the architect. Technology's biggest consumer and the biggest, most important person you have to satisfy is the VP of operations, because you lose more money during operational failures than initial architecture. So what we were able to do is to satisfy each of those people by saying simplicity was one of our biggest motto, that how we will simplify these complex networks to a single policy point and a massive scale. So we went after simplicity, security, and scalability. And we had the team that has background of scale, so the software development team. We had the team that had created one of the major products, and we had the team which had deployed the biggest network. So between these three groups, we were able to create a team which was able to create simplification, scale, and security. And our message really started to resonate, and that's what our biggest momentum. So building the good team was a very key element of the initial days. So here's one of my personal observations. And as you guys start to build teams, think about this as a long term. There is a difference between a team that reaches a certain point where IQ is very key. So the early days when you're building and when you come up with an idea, your IQ matters. When you build a product, your IQ matters. As you're building a company, EQ becomes more important than IQ. If I look at Cisco, most of the Cisco leaders I interacted with, the top leaders, SVP and above, incredibly high EQ. So companies are built based on EQ, based on the generous mindset, based on open-mindedness. And I think a lot of startups, they start to suffer from that point where they have people with tremendous IQ at a point where there is EQ is needed, and that's where you go to the next level. So if you're thinking about going all the way, think about these recipes that needs to be present in building a company. Now, once we took down a couple of major accounts from Cisco, and vIPtela pretty much, one of the Cisco senior leaders told me, vIPtela became synonymous with SD-WAN. Any customer we talked to, you guys were it, as synonymous to SD-WAN. So that created interest from Cisco, and the momentum we had gotten from the customers drove Cisco towards the interest. After long discussions, meetings, here we are back at Cisco. A lot of the guys who had left Cisco came back and was easy adjustment back into the culture. Finally, what's next for me? So one of the things that I find very, on a personal level, satisfying is the industry adoption of our innovation. Now we had a team of 40, 45 sales guys selling a product. Since we are back at Cisco, we have a team of 20,000 people selling the product. Yeah, we're having scaling challenges. Yeah, we're working hard to get our technology deployed. Adoption is there, acceptance is there. Now it's the deployment challenges. You talk to guys like Zahir, you got to go talk to guys like Musaddiq. They'll always tell you that we've been up for 16, 18 hours deploying, because earlier I was getting 5 customers a week. Now I'm getting 100 customers a week. So that's a challenge. We're